Hello, my name is Don Schnitzler. I'm a member of the Forest History Association Board of Directors, and I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar is on the Wisconsin Pineries Mission, 1841 to 1845. Forest History Association sponsors these monthly webinars as a way to meet our mission of inform, educate, archive, and publish the forest history of Wisconsin. We hope that you are benefiting by attending these live presentations. And I want you to know that if you can't attend a live presentation, these webinars are always archived and published to our website and also to the collections on our YouTube channel. And typically it happens within a few hours. We invite you to consider joining us. Oops. I gotta see something's not working. There we go. There we go. All right. We invite you to join us or consider joining us if you are interested in these webinars by becoming a member of the association. Membership dues are just $20 a year, and there's a list of membership benefits on our website underneath the membership heading. You can see about all the ways that your membership would help meet our goals for the association. And then you can see on the right side of the screen here that it's very easy to join. Just a click of the button and you can get signed up in a real short time. Tonight, to help make this webinar successful, we're going to ask everyone to ask their questions using the chat feature. Typically, the chat feature is at the bottom of the screen. You can pose your questions anytime during the talk, and at the end of the talk, we will relay those questions to Mary, our speaker, and get them answered for you. If you're new to Zoom, or if you have any challenges tonight, you can send a message to me using that same chat feature, and I will try to help you. But just so you know, tonight I'm on by myself, and so I'm not sure how everything works all the time, but I will try. And finally, be aware that you will receive a brief survey after the webinar ends. There are 8 questions, and we'd appreciate you taking just a couple minutes to provide a little feedback for our speaker and us about this webinar and possible future webinars. So tonight's talk is entitled The Wisconsin Pineries Mission, 1841 to 1845. Our speaker, Mary Jurgaitis, is a researcher and spokesperson for Honoring the Mormon Loggers of the Wisconsin Pineries Mission, 1841 to 1845. And she will share the story of how a group of people built the foundation of their beautiful city, the city of Nauvoo, Illinois, with white pine taken from the banks of the Black River in Jackson and Clark counties. So I know you're all here to see or listen to Mary, so I am pleased to turn the platform over to her now. Mary.
Thank you.
Okay, can you see the slides, Mary?
No.
All right, so just you go through your slides. You have your PowerPoint up?
I don't.
Oh, okay. Can you pull them up?
Okay. And let's see here. Now, to make it on my iPad, it's hard for me to know where to click to start the.
Okay, so I am on the Wisconsin Pineries Mission slide number 4 for your PowerPoint. And this is what people are seeing right now.
Okay, all right. So this is the beginning, and I want you to be aware of that. But I also want you to know that there will be times when I use the word we or our, because I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, And this story is part of my legacy also. Next. And again, most images at this point in time have to be representations. There was very little photography going on. So I hope you're okay with all of the images that you see. And I tried to pick ones that would be great and representative. Okay. There are more stories from the Wisconsin Pineries Mission, which I can't tell at this time. It's about the families that came and the experiences of the indigenous people. Each story needs its own PowerPoint. Okay. This is a brief history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at this point in time. Notice the highlighted dates on here. The church was first organized by Joseph Smith Jr. in 1830. In 1831, they began gathering in Kirtland and Missouri. By 1839, actually when they were in Kirtland, that's when they built their first temple. And we were talking about a temple that they built this on this PowerPoint too. The saints were forced to move from Missouri in 1839. And also those who were in Kirtland did. They found a place to settle in an area called Commerce. And by 1840, they began building their city beautiful with the temple as their ultimate goal. Okay. Next. Next. Okay. This is the way Commerce looked when the Latter-day Saints arrived. It was swampy and mosquito laden, lots of sickness. Canals were dug to drain the swamps. Now, I put a map in there so you can see where Nauvoo, and also mention Hancock and Adams County, because that enters into this too. So it was that big, I call it the nose in Illinois, the part that stuck out around the bend. And you can see the picture, how it looks in the image, how that bend looks. Okay. And how did that become this? This is Joseph Smith renamed this place Nauvoo. It is the Hebrew word used in Isaiah chapter 52, verse 7, meaning beautiful. So Nauvoo became the city beautiful. But to make the city beautiful, lumber was needed. Every building in this representation used the Wisconsin Pineries white pine. Okay. This is the story of how a group of people built the foundation of their city beautiful during the years of 1841 to 1845. I garnered most of my information from a document titled The Mormon Experience in the Wisconsin Pineries, 1841 to 1845 by Dennis Raleigh. And from various records that have been kept, which a lot were, Dennis Raleigh estimated that approximately 200 Latter-day Saints had spent time working in the Wisconsin Pineries. And a list of those that he could readily identify is included in the appendix of his document. It was called a mission because those who went to the Pineries were specifically designated to go. Many were destitute immigrant converts from Great Britain who flowed into this gathering place, and I mean flowed. They filled the need for workers. This is an artist's rendition of what a sawmill may have looked like. Okay. The other way. Has to go forward. Okay, so this is the reason why the whole community was built. And this was from the Bible, where Paul, the Apostle Paul, says, they without us cannot be made perfect. It was given a responsibility to seek after our dead. For it is necessary that the sealing power should be in our hands to seal our children and our dead for the fullness of the dispensation of times. And there's some learning that could be done about this, but this was a serious responsibility that was given to Joseph Smith, and it needed to be done in a dedicated building, a temple. That responsibility still rests on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints today. Okay. The goal was to build, back one. The goal was to build a temple where this could take place. It would be the only fully functional temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the world at that time. Now, to give you an idea of how important temples are to the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as of October 6th, 2024, worldwide, there will be 367 temples, either dedicated, under construction, or announced and in the planning stages. One of the 17 temples that was just announced will be somewhere in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area. Okay. So how did they know that the white pine in the Wisconsin territory would be just what they would need? Due to the reports of lumber being available in the relative wilderness of Wisconsin from newspapers, from those who had passed through Wisconsin, and from those who had even worked in Wisconsin. The leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints decided that mills could be established at little cost other than the cost of the mill equipment. And the workers sent to the mill, except the pinery, expected no pay, except that their needs would be met with clothing, food, and needed equipment while in the pineries, plus lumber to build their homes in Nauvoo. And they were able to sing the song that Latter-day Saints still sing today. Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. And I'm going to play that a little later with another slide. Okay. Now, one of the reasons why they had to go someplace is because Nauvoo, was on the treeless prairies of Illinois, and whatever lumber was there was quickly used up. So they had to find a place, and a place that would, believe it or not, inexpensive compared to ordering it from the East Coast. Okay. This is what they were looking for. This is an actual photo, but it was in 1865, and realize that this is up until 1845 that they were harvesting the timber. So a lot of the timber was already down by 1865, but this is an old forest growth. And can you see the man? Can you see how big that timber is that they were looking for? And this is an actual photo that is archived in the Marathon County Historical Society. Okay. This is the map showing the route from Nauvoo, Illinois, to the Wisconsin Pineries.
Message is received from 1505-416.
And even that was traveled by workers, men, women, and even children to harvest the timber to build their temple for the purpose as told by Joseph Smith Jr. The distance from Black River Falls to the mills to the logging camps in Neilsville was about 30 miles, but it was 400 miles from Nauvoo And again, people say, okay, so why just for one town, 400 miles? But that's was going to work for them. That was the closest and the best, and we'll find out more about that. Okay. This is where they decided to go. They had heard about the pine trees and the already established mills through various sources, including from the men whose sawmills we ended up using. Those men lived near Nauvoo in Adams and Hancock counties and were known to those in charge who would be coming up to the pineries. Now, my family and I lived in Neilsville, Wisconsin for 20 plus years, smack dab in the middle of where the stands of the best timber were. Sometimes I imagine that the loggers were harvesting their timber right in my backyard because I only lived a block and a half, or a half a block from O'Neill Creek. Okay. So why on the Black River? Because we have the Wisconsin River, the Chippewa River. Why? The Chippewa River was too far north and would require extra transportation and time, and plus it's bigger. And lumbering was already taking place on the Wisconsin River, and there were too many falls and rapids, and that was more difficult. The Black River was shorter, plus the big plus was that very minimal logging had been done north of Black River Falls, mostly by a farmer or two who wanted to make some money. He would take a tree down and send it down to a mill. And the nearest lumber available was not far up the river in Jackson County, which is where most of it had not been harvested yet. And that included Jackson County and what is now Clark County. Okay. From 1841 through 1842, this was our first sawmill. I don't know if anybody knows where Roaring Creek is, but I think some of you do. It was already a working sawmill, and that's what the farmers were using to have their lumber sawed. We were basically renting our usage and amount of time for the mill. The mill had to be shared with the owners, plus the current loggers in the area. The owners were known because, again, they had lived only 20 miles from Nauvoo. So we knew about this mill. Even though a lot of logs were sawn here, it was not enough. Okay. So this is what Roaring Creek looks like today on the top left. The map shows where Roaring Creek enters the Black River, bottom left, and the photo on the right shows where Roaring Creek enters the Black River. And you can see in the map that it enters the river just where there's a turn on the river, which probably made it a lot easier to get the logs into the river. I just wanted to mention that this is in Irving, Wisconsin. And when I first found out about that, is that a sign? My maiden name is Irving. Anyway, there are things that have changed so much on the rivers, the streams and the rivers, that's why Roaring Creek looks like that. Okay. Okay, so what to do? Only one mill. We had to share it half time. The amount of lumber needed was not coming to Nauvoo fast enough. Joseph Smith was anxious, and there was a reason, because he felt that we were under a timeline. Okay. All right, so what to do? 2 men in our mills. Jacob Spaulding and George Miller. Joseph Smith knew George Miller's capabilities and called him to go to the pineries to get the work moving faster. Miller was, I expect you to do what I expect you to do. Plus, he had some dealings with Jacob Spaulding in, again, Hancock and Adams County as far back as 1837. He knew that Spaulding had sawmills at Black River Falls. And the long story involves suits against Spaulding by many different people for many different reasons, including the fits and starts in his history of building sawmills. Because George Miller knew of those problems, He was able to extend to Spalding an offer he couldn't refuse for the 2 sawmills that Spalding had at Black River Falls. The unfortunate thing is, or fortunate, whatever, the 2 required repair work, plus a third was built on a foundation of a previous one that had already been there. The mills were formally taken possession on January 1st of 1843. And you can see that we officially began using them on January 2nd, right in the middle of winter. Okay, George Miller's journal tells of his trip up to the Wisconsin Pineries to meet with Jacob Spalding. It took him more than a month because he was walking up the Black River with oxen, supplies, and equipment from Prairie du Chien to the workers at Roaring Creek, and also what would be needed for the mills in Black River Falls. What Miller wrote in his journal, and it's listed at the end as a source that I used, was very graphic about the weather and the great effort it took to get to the Pineries. I got worn out and cold just reading it. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to start now on why the Wisconsin pineries with the white pine were so worthwhile. First of all, the trees were 200 to 400 years old, and they had been growing there. I could tell the story of why, but it is long, and it involves the history of the indigenous people in Wisconsin. Okay. Now, have you ever been in a building with 120-foot ceiling? I know that some railroad stations, maybe even an airport, has a ceiling that might be 120 feet tall. Look up sometime, try to imagine where 120 feet would end. Okay. And there were no branches until the top, therefore very few nuts, because as a tree grows and there's no branches that are going to affect the outside growth of a tree, then the knots in certain areas of that tree all the way around are gone. Okay. And this shows exactly that. The lack of branches was created by self-pruning. The trees were so close together that they knocked off each other's branches. Each tree fought for access to the sun. I also feel that they fought each other. I mean, they did. That's why they knocked the branches off. It's amazing to think that the trees fought. Okay. Okay, because so little logging had occurred north of Black River Falls, most likely the timber our loggers harvested was right along the streams. That made the harvesting easier, if you want to call it that, easier. Okay. One of the characteristics of the white pine is that it would float. When logging began anywhere on the rivers of Wisconsin, that was very important for the transportation of the logs on the waterways. Okay. And one tree produced approximately 4,000 to 5,000 board feet of lumber. Now, I don't know exactly how to vision that, but what I found out is that a board foot of lumber, and some of you know that, is 1 foot long, 1 foot wide, and 1 inch thick. Now, the trees, when they were cut down, were cut into 16-foot logs. So they weren't that, but that's how they determined how much lumber was there. Okay. And this is what I found out. 2 trees or less could fill 1 semi-trailer today. And you can see, again, that man standing against one of those trees, and you could see that as they milled that lumber and put it in a truck, it would be maybe one tree. Okay. Now I finished about the characteristics of the white pine. Now, what about the loggers? Some were highly skilled in the business of lumbering and building and were accomplished carpenters. For example, George Miller had worked on the construction of the University of Virginia before he moved west. Others had already owned and operated sawmills. Others who worked in the pineries were recent converts and immigrants who needed the means to provide for themselves and their families. They provided the labor for all the hard work that was needed. There were three types of workers: semi-permanent, those who stayed more than one season, some of whom were even beginning to put down roots and planning on establishing the church in the area. For example, a logger by the name of Alan Stout and another worker had already built a home. They were planting crops, and they asked for friends and family to come and bring tools and seeds. Alan Stout had written a number of letters that described the pineries, which was really a great thing. And I did not put that on the source, I'm sorry. But if you can somehow contact me, I can give you, it was really interesting to read what he wrote about the pineries. And he was right there on the river in Black River Falls, right there in that community where the falls came down. Next were the seasonal workers. They worked in the winter to cut the timber, to get it ready to send it to the mills, or working in the spring and summer with the bugs and the mosquitoes at the sawmills for more than one season. And of course, in the winter with the deep snow. Some seasonal workers would be in the pineries for a season, go back to Nauvoo, then come back up to the pineries. Elijah Cunningham was one who did that, and I'll tell you about him later. Then there were those who were single trippers, who only came up to the pineries once, for example, to bring supplies or help out for a season, then return to Nauvoo. Okay. Okay, this shows where most of the hard winter work was done in the harvesting of the timber. Neillsville, Greenwood, mostly in the Neillsville area, on Wedges Creek, O'Neill Creek, and Cunningham Creek. Those were the main creeks that were used to get the timber into Black River. I found an old, okay, let me back up a little bit here. After the loggers left in 1845, some people in the area began calling the locations of the logging camps Mormon clearings that had been on Wedges Creek, O'Neill's Creek, and Cunningham Creek. And I found an old timer or two who remembered that. There is also a place near Hatfield, halfway between Neillsville and Black River Falls, that was called the Mormon Riffles. And it was at Hatfield. And some still do that. I actually found somebody who said, oh yeah, I know where that is. The water, it's hard to see that picture, that image there. The water was fast and treacherous, and the water was probably way deeper than that, but there's rocks on either side. A logging camp was there in the Hatfield area with workers who helped get the logs through the riffles. I met a descendant of a logger whose ancestors had been there at Hatfield working in a logging camp. Now, we lived, as you can see, O'Neill Creek is on there. We lived about a block or less from O'Neill Creek. We feel that a logging camp was on O'Neill Creek about 3 blocks down a ways from where we lived. Okay. So much had to be done all at once when a logging camp was being set up. The timber harvesting camps were mostly built of logs, not lumber. The sawmills were one of the most important structures that had to be built. Not much else could be built until it was up and running. At first, shanties were built to house the workers who began to clear the area for a camp. And I want you to see the difference between the logs that are by this sawmill and how big those logs would have been from these trees. Even by that time, the timber was a little bit smaller. So can you imagine getting a 16-foot log from one of those trees into the sawmill. Okay. The sawmills were one of the most important structures that had to be built. Not much else could be built until it was up and running. And the sawmills had to be repaired and or built. Okay. No, don't turn. At the same time, harvesting of the timber began, the cookhouse had to be built. Can you tell which building is the cookhouse? It's the one that has the chimney on it. This logger is working at this height to facilitate the strength of the axe swing. I have a friend whose father said that when he bought his property, that it was filled with tree stumps of that height. And he would take those tree stumps and sell them to people for firewood. But they were all over the place, those tree stumps. And because the forests there in the Neilsville area, that was all filled with tree stumps. And in the anybody that came up, because each worker had their assigned responsibility. So a lot of activity was going on at the same time. Okay. Then bunkhouses, log cabins, and even homes were built to house the men with families. There were, again, men with families. So they built some homes. I even read where somebody was making bedsteads to put in his home. Notice the man in the middle image, in the lower right-hand corner of that image. He is making shingles. This was a characteristic of the white pine. It split easily into shingles. And when I first heard about shingles, I thought, the kind of shingles that they put on our roof. But as you look at the house that's in where it says homes, that's what the shingles were like, one long piece. Okay. Tools were sharpened daily. So this is more activity that's going on in a camp. Tools were sharpened daily, maybe even more often. The person who sharpened the tools was as important as the cook. Clothing needed to be washed. A number of girls and women and wives also came to the pineries to help with this task. Even shoes needed to be made and repaired. George Miller even built a shoe shop next to his cabin, and he said that he was engaged in making shoes every night. Okay. Now this is about getting up to the pineries and then back to Nauvoo. All traveled on the Mississippi, at least they could do that, until reaching the mouth of the Black River. And then some walked to the mills and the logging camps. A person also wrote in his autobiography, this is what he wrote: I left Nauvoo for the Black River Pinery with Bishop George Miller for the purpose of helping bring down lumber, etc., for the temple and Nauvoo house. We went as far as Prairie La Crosse on the Mississippi by the steamboat, then took it on foot for 100 miles up the Black River. There being no regular trail we could find, we were lost for some 2 days, but at length found ourselves within 40 miles of the mills on the Black River Falls. Okay. So this is somebody must have sketched this picture. This is the Maid of Iowa, which was purchased by Joseph Smith and Dan Jones to facilitate the saints' ability to get around on the Mississippi. There were saints who were also living on the Iowa side of the river, and to take supplies and workers up to the pineries as far as they could get. And they had animals, they had all different kinds of supplies, and they had to be offloaded. Okay. Again, this is from Joseph Holbrook's autobiography. Immediately the next day, we started down the Black River with a raft And I'm not sure what that was like. Okay. With Henry Miller, who was a different Miller. When at the lake at the mouth of the river, we met Brother Cunningham, again, Brother Cunningham, with his boatload of provisions, which started from Nauvoo some 6 weeks before. That's because they were sailing against the wind and they were going against the current also. We had a small keel boat with us that we had brought down to take back provisions, which were much needed at the mills. So we took a part of Brother Cunningham's provisions from his boat, and then both boats started up the river, manned with about 10 men to each boat. The river being high and the current strong, we were forced to bushwhack our way by taking hold of bush at the bow of each boat and running back to the stern, and so continuing through the day. We were 25 miles per day. Can you imagine the effort this took to get 25 miles bushwhacking? Okay. Then from that to a flatboat. That was moved upriver mostly by poling, using a long pole to push along. And the persons doing the poling would go to the front of the boat, get the pole to touch bottom, then walk along inside the boat to the back, and so on. Or they would also bushwhack. The flat boat could even get close to the camps on the Black River in the Neilsville, Greenwood area. So they could get up that far because there was very little draft on the bottom of that. This was from a biography that was written about one of the loggers that was up there. And it said, and his name was Lyman White. We passed up the Mississippi River on the steamer made of Iowa. It was necessary that the company leave the steamer at La Crosse and ascend the Black River to the falls by flatboats. So even right before the Black River Falls, these boats were 10 feet wide and 30 feet long and were propelled by push poles, paddles, and by pulling on overhanging brush. Okay. And the final leg of the journey to getting those supplies to the log camps, and also remember they were taking animals with them too, was sledding or skidding or backpacking. Sometimes these were pulled by the oxen, more often than not, pulled by the workers who were heading to the logging camp. And these were the same kind of sleds that were used to skid the logs. And you can see that the sled could be lengthened as needed. Okay. Okay, so how did they get back to Nauvoo? This gives a good idea of what the lumber rafts look like. I know one other presentation used the same image, but I really liked it because it's a very good image that represents what it was like. Generally, there were more people on the rafts than what this showed, because there were the people, the seasoners, the ones who wanted to get back to Nauvoo, and the ones who were going back to Nauvoo and then coming back up. And again, in this biography about Lyman White, this is what was written. On one of the rafts, a cabin was built, providing shelter for Lyman's family. Rock were placed in front of it in which fires could be built for the preparing of food. Their meals during the trip consisted of fish and ducks, which were caught as they floated along the river. Items also were obtained by trading with the Indians camped along the banks of the river. Well, that was from a biography that was written by someone who apparently had access to a journal that maybe Lyman White had written. And this information is recorded in the journal history of October 13th, 1842. As these and future rafts tied up at the waterfront in Nauvoo, all work stopped on the temple, and even in the whole city. The rafts were met by teams and wagons, were dismantled, and the lumber hauled to the temple for use in the temple and other buildings, as you saw in one of the initial photos. Okay. Now this is an actual picture of Nauvoo, and it was probably after it was abandoned. As these and future, this demonstrates the uses of the lumber, plus you can see the shingles. At least 2,000 homes and other buildings had been built from 1841 to 1845 using the Wisconsin white pine. One method the mobs used to force the saints to leave Nauvoo in 1846 was to burn their homes. As you can see, many of the buildings were mostly wood, which made it easy to burn those homes. There were other homes that had red brick, that they'd found clay that created red bricks, and a lot of the homes were encased in red brick. And those homes and buildings mostly survived not only the burning, but also the ravages of time, until the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints began fully restoring their city beautiful in 1962. And a video is listed in my sources screen that shows what Nauvoo looked like in 1950 when people first came to see what they could do. Okay. All right. This is the last notations of the rafts arriving. This was the Times and Seasons. It was the local newspaper, and they saw the arrival of 2 large rafts. And this is a good representation of what a raft would look like, though I think there probably would have been more boats on the side. And we know that, some people know that the boats on the raft were for the purpose of pulling a rope to the edge of the river so that they could tie it down for the night. There are a number of buildings on there too. So July of 1844, the arrival of 2 large rafts and sufficient lumber was supplied this year to complete the needs for the temple, plus additional for other uses. Then on November 7th, 1845, the final raft of lumber for the Wisconsin Pineries arrives in Nauvoo. It consists of 100,000 board feet and is enough to finish the temple. It is hard to imagine the joy that that was felt as those. Now you can see that you can't see Nauvoo because it's around the bend there, and how those who were on this last raft of lumber came around the bend and saw their city beautiful, and the results of their 4 years of toil and labor and sacrifice. Now that goes along with the screen that showed that final raft of lumber. And this, it took 4 years for this industrious group of Latter-day Saints to build their city beautiful. Their city was larger than Chicago at that time. There were over 2,000 homes, over 12,000 Latter-day Saints, maybe even more. And in February, right in the middle of the winter when it was the coldest, the Mississippi had frozen over, and 2,000 Latter-day Saints started their trek west to the Salt Lake Valley in February of 1846. And gradually the whole community, except for a few, left Nauvoo. They looked back on that city where their well-constructed, comfortable homes were left behind. But the most heart-wrenching sight was the beautiful, I'm missing this part here, the beautiful temple that they had sacrificed so much for. Okay. Next. Oh, I think I touched something. Okay. Now, Dennis Raleigh, as I said, I got a lot of my information from him. He had done a lot of research. He summed up the paper he had written with these words: for 4 winters, commencing in the fall of 1841 and ending in the spring of 1845, the Latter-day Saints worked the pineries, harvesting an estimated 1.5 million board feet of milled lumber and over 200,000 shingles in an undeterminable number of loose logs, hewed timbers, and barn boards. He said that was equal to more than 40 semi-loads or enough lumber to build about 215 3-bedroom houses of our day. The harvest from the pineries was floated down to Nauvoo on at least a dozen rafts, beginning in the spring of 1842. The reason why he was able to do so much research is because a lot of records are kept, and those records are archived in Salt Lake City in what is called the Church History Library. Okay. And this is what George Miller wrote. He said, "Too much cannot be said in praise of these faithful brethren. They really performed wonders. We were in the midst of a howling wilderness, and the aspect of our affairs to some might seem forbidding. But we were all buoyant with hope of better days and resolved on accomplishing the work we had undertaken." And they did. Okay. This was the first home that was restored when the restorations began in 1954. Because it was encased in red brick, it survived from 1846, and there had been people living on it on and off during that time. Dr. J. Leroy Kimball purchased that building the way it looked in the first picture because it had belonged to his great-grandfather. He began restoring it for a summer home, but so many people wanted to see it that he was never able to use it. As a result, Nauvoo Restorations Incorporated was formed in 1960. Homes and other buildings that had survived were gradually restored, and you can see how this one was restored, how beautiful it was. On top of that, they purchased pieces of property that where the homes didn't survive, but they still learned a lot about the homes that had been on that property. And those buildings that could be restored still had the original white pine. In one home that was restored, it was discovered that the wood used in the attic was made with the raft boards that had been used to lash the rafts together. And the way they could tell that is because when the rafts were lashed together, they had to make like a 2-inch hole, and then they stuck these wooden pieces all the way along to tie them together. And when they looked in the attic of this home, they saw those holes in there, and immediately they knew that that was from the raft. And I had the thrill of walking on the original white pine floors in some of the businesses and homes in Nauvoo. Everybody else was looking at around the building. I was looking at the floor because I was walking on it. I have a friend on Facebook who posted daily photos, and this was about 5 years ago. of her taking the white pine flooring out of one of the homes because they were still restoring homes and they still are. And she used a smoothing plane, sealed each plank, then put it back in that home. And I watched her do that. She was handling that original Wisconsin white pine. Nauvoo, a city beautiful. Nauvoo is a city beautiful again. It is a wonderful place to visit. There are docents in each building that has been restored to tell you the story of that beautiful building. Okay. As the restorations continued, Nauvoo became more and more popular attraction, especially for the descendants of those who left their city beautiful in 1846. And again, just about everybody knows who their ancestors were who left Nauvoo. Many began hoping that an almost identical temple would be built on the original footprint. And because of its importance to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it was announced by church leadership in 1999 that the Nauvoo, Illinois temple would be rebuilt. And this is a pretty much of a replica of the way the temple looked, though it was made up to modern specifications, and this time no white pine, unfortunately. It was dedicated on the 27th of June, 2002. And as you can see, this photo is a courtesy of me. I took that photo and I love it. Okay, how much time do I have here? Okay.
You're fine.
Okay, next. I have some more information that I would like to share with you. Okay, these are again from Joseph Holbrook's autobiography. He had come up to the Pineries with Elijah Cunningham and was planning to go back to Nauvoo with him. Elijah Cunningham is the only known death that was recorded in the Pineries. This creek is on Highway 73, about 2 miles south of Neillsville, Wisconsin. It got the name Cunningham Creek after the loggers left. Some settlers in the area began referring it to as the creek that logger Cunningham drowned in. And it says he got in a whirl in the river and was seen no more. We don't know what happened. Sometimes the bodies can be recovered, but I never heard that his body was recovered. The only other death that we knew of was that one person had contracted pneumonia, but then died in Nauvoo. Okay, so this is Cunningham Creek. I drove over this constantly, and a lot of people do. Okay. This is a photo of the creek running in the spring. How could those huge logs get down this stream? If you look at the banks, you can get an idea of how high and wide the creek could have gotten once upon a time. Not anymore. But I feel too that this creek hit the Black River at an angle. And so that could have created that whirl that he fell into. Okay. This is an official Wisconsin historical marker. It is located in Neillsville, Wisconsin on Highway 10, just east of the bridge that goes over the Black River. It tells about the loggers harvesting timber for the Nauvoo temple, plus explains why the creek has the name Cunningham Creek. The other side, there's another side to this, tells about the beginnings of Neillsville. The marker was placed and dedicated in September of 2016. In the other picture, Janet Seymour is the one who helped me. She's Field Services, Northern Region, Wisconsin Historical Society, Outreach and Program Division. She assisted in all things Wisconsin historical marker for this marker. So she made it, and she told me that of all of the 500 some Wisconsin historical markers, this one was only 6 of all of them that had an image on it. I am sure there's probably more that are being created with images, but I was really glad It's the same picture that I showed you before to give an idea of what the pinery forests were. Then standing next to her is our mayor he was the former mayor of Neillsville. Then there's me. And then there's a person by the name of Kenny Mays. He was on the Mormon Historic Sites Foundation, and he was instrumental in securing the funding for this market through the foundation. And that's why he's here. And I was grateful for that. Okay. This is another historical marker that honors the Latter-day Saint loggers, and it's located in Black River Falls at the Field of Honor Park. The Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square paid for that marker. They said that they took $5, each took $5 out of their pocket and paid for it. It tells a little about George Miller, Jacob Spalding, and our sawmills at Black River Falls. During their 2013 Midwest tour, they stopped in Black River Falls at the Field of Honor Park to dedicate it and presented a short program to honor the logging missionaries. As you can see down in the right-hand corner, that some of the choir members knew who their logging missionary ancestors were. 11 descendants were there, and I have met a few more people at various times and places who are descendants of the logging missionaries of the Wisconsin Pineries. This marker tells the story, the brief story of George Miller, Jacob Spalding, and the sawmills. And it's all very interesting because it tells how we got, no, it doesn't tell anything negative at all about the situation. And it just tells how we got the mills, and that's where our sawmills, and it's really right across the street from where our sawmills would have been. And then this is the then mayor, Ron Danielson of Black River Falls, and he moderated the program. He was very happy to be able to do that. Okay. These are sources that I used, and I have included the links, and I don't know if you can access that when it's on YouTube, but they're there if you're interested. Okay, next one. And these are, as you can see, the first one is with the Tabernacle Choir at Black River Falls in 2013, and it's about 5 minutes long. And then there's another one made by another person that's about 12 minutes long. And then the one at the bottom, Old Nauvoo in 1950, it was just before the restoration began, and it shows you what Nauvoo looked like when people came to see what was left of Nauvoo. And it's very interesting, about 25 minutes. Okay. And finally, the last slide. This is you can see the original white pine forest as compared to the new growth forest. That's what they call it because it is new growth. It could even be 100 years old in some places, but it's still new growth compared to the original white pine forest. And thank you for inviting me to present this to you.
Thank you, Marion. Very, very informative, and it's always good to learn more about Wisconsin history. I found out that I cannot check the chat feature and advance slides at the same time because it stops it from working. So
okay,
I apologize for those times when I couldn't get those slides moved quite fast enough. So anyway, a couple comments. Michael Slocum said, "Bravo, Mary, immense amount of work and preparation." And then John Grossman commented, "What a beautiful story." Let's see, there we go. Truly enjoy this offering. Is this story still alive in the ranks of the faithful in Salt Lake?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And actually, like I said, a lot of the records, there was a man who was in charge of keeping the records of what was given to each one of the workers there, like if they needed to have clothing or shoes or anything like that. That record book is in the church history library in Salt Lake City, and I had a chance to look at it and turn the pages and to see what it was written. Plus, all of the journals and letters that were written are also there and also kept by the descendants of them. And so that's how all of that could be learned.
Yeah, and Ryan Howell mentions the Dennis Rowley's journal,
Uh-huh.
Mormon Experience. He's got a link to it in the chat. So if someone's interested, just click on that and it'll open it up and you can save it. It is a great article. I've always enjoyed reading that one.
The other thing that's interesting about that too is that he has a list of about 200 loggers, and some of them were missed, but he has a list of those who he could find out had been up there in the pineries.
Okay, and then Ryan also commented, Bill Quackenbush, who's one of the historic preservation officers for the Ho-Chunk, still has oral histories of meeting the LDS loggers. Do you know of anything from your history research about LDS loggers and the Ho-Chunk interactions?
Oh, yes. And George Miller talked about that. And there are a couple of other people who talked about that. The interaction that George Miller had with the Ho-Chunk at that time was able to facilitate what we did, because at that time, the Native Americans were burning down the mills when they thought that people were using their forest. And so there have been a lot of mills that were burnt down. And some of them came to George Miller and said, you need to stop taking our lumber, and if you don't, we're going to burn your mills down. And he said, well, I have provided food for your children. I have picked you up when you were laying in the snow drunk because of what was given to you by the white man. I have done this and I have done that. And he walked with, it says Chief Oshkosh. He walked with Chief Oshkosh to the Indian, whatever that is, on the Wisconsin River, and talked to the Indian agent there. And as they were talking, the Indian agent said, whatever the Native Americans say, I will abide by that. And they said, just fine. So and George Miller said to them, okay, for all of that, if you want to come and burn our mills, go ahead. And they never did. And everything was good. And there was a lot of interaction with them, a lot of very wonderful interaction with them.
Okay, another question came in about what happened to the original temple. And I think you mentioned it, but you want to elaborate on that story a little bit?
What happened is that after the saints left Nauvoo, shortly thereafter, an arsonist got in there and burned it. And again, thinking about all of the wood that was inside as the framework, it burned. And then after that, a tornado came through and knocked 3 of the outside walls off. And there was one wall that was left. And eventually the people who had moved into Nauvoo decided that was very dangerous. And so they took it down. So for a long time, all what was left was the footprint of the temple. And one time I was there before they had rebuilt the temple. I could see I walked on the footprint. They had used that. The people who were starting to move into Nauvoo used that area because it had kind of like walls around, just not too high, but it was used as cattle grazing, a bunch of other things. They even tried to build some houses in there, which didn't work very well. So it was just destroyed. And probably the best thing that could have happened is that it was destroyed.
When the LDS left Nauvoo, Were there any LDS missionaries still left in Wisconsin, or did they stay after some of the others left for Salt Lake City?
Um, the missionaries themselves, it just all depends on what kind of, how they were looking at things. Like the person that I mentioned, Lyman White, he did stay, but he kind of separated himself from the rest. And there were others who separated themselves from the rest. And they became what was known as the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And they have a history there too. Some of them stayed. So it was just too hard for them. And they had a hard time, couldn't do the rest. But most of them left. And they got, by the time they got down there and were able to use the temple. And actually, I think, I don't know if I said that the beds of the covered wagons that were used to take the Latter-day Saints out west were probably used our leftover white pine. So even our white pine probably went west with them. But yes, there were some who stayed in probably Neillsville, some who stayed in Black River Falls, some who moved to like up to Michigan. And so there were others, but most of them went.
Okay. What happened to the Black River sawmills after the Saints went to Utah?
That's a good question. What happened is that Jacob Spalding wanted them back because they were in good shape now. And what he did is he paid them with 10,000 board feet of lumber. And that was not very much money, but they weren't going to stay, and at least they got some of that, and that was hard. So it went back to Jacob Spalding, and I'm not sure what happened, but I know that his son kind of took over that whole area because it was all cleared, because we had our buildings, the farming that they were doing there, that was all cleared. So that's, and even now in Black River Falls, there is an area that's called Spalding's. Something was built there, and it's part of the Chamber of Commerce is on that. At the park, all of that was where the logging was going on, and so it didn't stay with us, but Jacob got it back, which is okay.
Then there's a comment from Jen Woolworth. She says a branch called the Jurgaitis did settle in Jackson County in the area known as Knapp.
Yes. They had started, actually they had started up in the Michigan area, the upper Michigan, and I guess they came back. And there is a cemetery in Black River Falls that has some of those people who were buried there that were the Jurgaitis, and I guess their last names were Knapp too.
Okay, that's the end of the questions. If anyone else have any questions? A couple comments, bravo, Mary, good job, stuff like that. So very interesting, Mary. I knew you'd do good. Great presentation. So
thank you for your help.
Oh, that was minor. So what I'm going to do is I've got to close the chat feature because then I can't advance. Until then, I can't advance the slide. Let's see. So we've done the questions, and I want to mention that we have our November webinar scheduled, and it's listed on our website, the Forest History Association of Wisconsin. If you're interested in learning about the use of fire, climate change, and forest resilience, our next webinar is Wednesday, November 20th from 6:30 to 7:30, and you can go online and register there anytime. Also, again, mentioning that there'll be a brief 8-question survey coming out in just a minute after we close the webinar. And I see that someone is making a comment. And I thank you for attending. Here, one more question. Oh, thanks. This has been very interesting, Mary. So
thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you very much. Good night, everybody. And you will be able to watch this webinar, recorded webinar on our website sometime after, well, tomorrow, anytime after tomorrow morning. Okay. Have a
Okay.
good night. Thank you,
Okay.
Mary.
Thank you. Thanks, Don.
Thanks. We'll see you later.
All righty. Thank you.